So this morning, I'm going to start with a story about a friend I'm going to call John, not his real name, and his brother Joe, also not his real name. Now, John and Joe were the two youngest brothers out of 4 boys in the family. The mother was a single mother, and John and Joe were born really close together, I would say between 14 and 18 months apart. So you know how that could go either way, right? They're either really close or maybe not, or they have lots in common, or they don't. And in this case, they did not have too much in common. John was extremely gregarious, outgoing, always wanted to be the life of the party. He worked really hard so that he could enjoy great dinners and lots of entertainment and go traveling. He just loved life in that way and loved having a great time. Joe was the opposite. He was an introvert. He wanted to go enjoy nature, either by himself or with 1 or 2 other friends at most. He wanted to chill at a cabin or just walk outside. He didn't want to party hard or not. He just wanted peace and quiet. And so Joe, in his life, for the first 10 years at least, ended up teaching. He loves kids, and he started teaching in a classroom. And like many young teachers, he just wasn't getting the fulfillment out of being in a school district, like most people would understand. And he decided he needed to find something that he was really called to do. So he moved near John. Now, John was in a more fast-paced life and worked for restaurants and hotels and was really having a great time, and so did his wife, and they still do. And so when John moved down to be near them to find out where he wanted to go, let's just say he settled into maybe a routine of not working extremely hard. He would put in, 20 or 30 hours a week. Some of us would be like, if we can do that for the rest of our lives, we will. But unfortunately for Joe, that meant that he could afford rent, but he needed help with some other things until he found what he really wanted to do in the city. And so John, having more than enough, said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you with your cell phone bill or your car insurance or whatever it might be. Well, you can imagine, after a year or 2 of that, some resentment started to grow. Brothers are potentially good at that, siblings in general. And, but it happened on both sides, right? On John's side, why are you not doing more so that, I don't need to give you money every month? And on Joe's side, why are you holding this over my head and forcing me to do something that I don't want to or am not ready to do? I'm still working on it. So let's say those events, of course, caused a bit of a blow up, and they didn't end up speaking for 3 to 5 years after that. John's generosity was so wonderful in the beginning of it, but it turned to something bitter and resentful, not helpful. As we start to look at our lectionary readings for today, one of my favorite books in the Bible is Proverbs, and I call it the book of one-liners, right? It doesn't tell a great story, but they're just one-liners, one after another, right? First, you have a great one. The rich and the poor, the one thing they have in common, God made us all, right? That's a great one. Another great one. don't sow injustice. Very important, especially in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. It's said many times over and over. My favorite, I had to read it a couple times, but it ended up being my favorite, was the rod of anger will fail. Now think about that a couple times, because I thought with a couple other people that it was a typo. I was like, well, fall maybe? Is there a different word that could go in there instead of fail? But no, it's fail. But when you read it a couple times, the rod of anger, you know, that thing that you pick up full of anger that you just want to swat people with. And God says, no, that's not going to work. That anger that you're going to use to beat somebody over the head with, that's going to fail. No matter how much you might like it at the time, it's going to fail. And in there, included in there, is be generous to the poor. Be generous to those who don't have bread. Be generous. We hear be generous again in James, right? Where James says, oh, if you give somebody to eat, something to eat, but they're still naked, are you really helping them? Because they probably need to have some clothes on as well. Be generous. James also talks about being generous of spirit. When coming through the doors of the church, the great equalizer when you walk through those doors is that we're all the same. Just like it said in Proverbs, the one thing that rich and poor have in common is that God made us all, the great equalizer. James said, rich or poor, everyone is treated the same when you walk through those doors. Being generous of spirit. Now, getting that to fit into what the gospel says, that was tricky at the first time. You know, you read that and you're like, where do you find generosity in the gospel that has to deal with the healing of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter and the gentleman who is deaf and mute? But it's simply in that, the generosity of Jesus to heal, right? Even more amazing, and we hear it all the time, but even more amazing, it didn't cost them anything. Jesus healed and did all those things and didn't ask for anything. He said, go and live your life. And to the deaf and mute, or formerly deaf and mute gentleman, he said, don't talk about it. Now, I did find that kind of interesting. If you happened home and you had always had a problem with speaking and been deaf and your family was there, they aren't going to notice, like they're going to ask questions. And maybe Jesus was, okay, you can tell them because they're going to notice, but nobody else. Nobody else. But no, it was the generosity of Jesus, how he had given without expecting anything in return. The other thing that we got from Jesus without expecting anything in return was the cross, right? You know, we didn't pay the price for what was going on in humanity. Jesus did. God did. Nothing that we do or give is ever good enough to say, you know what needs to happen? The Son of God needs to die for us. No, we didn't pay for that. That was given generously, without any expectation. When I look at my friends John and Joe, I think about a lot of people, maybe their age or my age or older or younger, who aren't willing to ask for help because that person is going to hold something over their head. How many times maybe have you said, oh, it'd be really nice for some help, but they're going to expect something of me and I just can't ask them for that? Or what would that make me look like if I asked for help? We do that all the time. But Jesus is like, I am generous. I'm not going to hold this over your head. Maybe if John had said, I'm just giving this to you, be blessed, love you, it would have saved them a blow up. Maybe Joe, if he instead had been incredibly grateful, abounding in love and kindness, maybe that 3 to 5 years of a relationship they would have back. I'm not going to judge what they did. It's not mine to judge. I'm just saying here in these readings, what I hear is an amazing generosity. But, like I said earlier, we're not in the stewardship season, so I'm not asking you to pull out your checkbook. That was a joke. No, I'm really not asking you to pull out your checkbook. But where is that generosity supposed to come from? Does it come from us wanting to be pat on the head by God and said, you did something right? Or does it come from the realization of that abounding love of Jesus that you got for nothing at all? And then you said, because I got so much, why do I not want to give? If I got so much and didn't deserve it, why do I not want to give generously whatever I can? That's what I wish for all of us, for me, for everybody. When we give, say, here you go. And it doesn't have to be a check. It's time, talents, and treasures. Any of those things count as being generous. It doesn't mean that every time somebody asks for money that you whip out a checkbook. If you can't, great. Maybe sit down with coffee with them, or for coffee with them. Maybe it's just giving them a hug or a handshake, looking at them, realizing that you do love them and care for them. And if they need something, you can help. That's where I would say I think generosity comes through here. It's not only because God tells us we're supposed to be generous, which God does, but that generosity comes from how generous God has been to us, how generous Jesus has been to us. And so as we leave this place today, I hope that it's not a matter necessarily of gratefulness, but a matter of joy, knowing that God loved you, still loves you, nothing's going to change that love, and when you fall down, God picks you back up and dusts you off and says, I'm here to help. I hope as a community we're here to help everyone, and I hope that our help comes from how joyous we are of the generous love that God has given us. Amen.